This guy was crazy. No, that's not pro wrestling Eugene Levy. That's the actual innovator of violence. Sorry, Tommy. A territory megahill and a hardcore wrestling pioneer. The walking riot, Bull Curry. There was always violence and tough guys and brawling in pro wrestling. But before Foley was falling off of cages, before Sick Nick was fighting weed whackers, before Onita and Funk blowing stuff up, Forks in Japan, even the Sheik and his fireball, before hardcore wrestling even had a name, there was Bull Curry. Obligatory bringing up that I played AAU against Steph Curry and moving on. You know, it's hard to nail down a lot of first in pro wrestling. We're at the mercy of spotty record keeping, at kayfabe, at the mercy of so many things happening at once without it all being nationally or globally tracked. It seems like most pro wrestling historians just kind of like narrow it down and go, that one, maybe. So when it comes to the first ever hardcore wrestler, that one, maybe. For hardcore wrestling, we're defining it as elevated violence that goes beyond the era normal version of pro wrestling. We're talking no DQ, weapons, blood. If you're looking for the 1940s version of the Tournament of Death, this isn't quite it, but this is what got the ball rolling. This is baby steps, not completely ripping the band-aid off. But if you think hardcore wrestling only has roots in Philly, or even in the barbed wire rings of Japan, or started with Bruiser Brody or the Sheik, this episode's for you. Fred Thomas Coury, spelled a little different, Koury, was born May 2nd, 1913 in Hartford, Connecticut. Fred grew up in Hartford's East End as part of a large working-class family. Looking to earn money, Curry reportedly left school around the age of 16, dropping out to enter the circus and carnival tough man world. We all went to high school with one kid that probably did this. So, tough man contests, just like the flyers you see stapled to a phone pole today, it's basically two dudes fighting. So essentially, Fred became an old school, way back pro wrestler. Pull a challenger from the crowd, if you beat me, you get money. Whether or not they kayfabed any of this, who knows, but either way, Fred learned to handle himself in a world of sideshows, crowd challenges, just attempting to make a living, tossing them hands. But Bull would also get into a version of pro wrestling that's a little closer to ours. Fred was almost certainly trained by Adam Weissmuller. And people love to bring up Adam Weissmuller because he was the old school Tarzan actor's cousin or something, but that's just kind of a trivia thing, it doesn't really matter. So I absolutely will not be shoehorning in the fact that Fred was trained by Adam Weissmuller, cousin of Johnny Weissmuller, the old school Tarzan actor. Curry's exact debut year is debated. The ever so accurate cagematch.net has matches starting as early as 1932, but like, if having a match up on Cage Match is your only alibi in a court case, you're going to jail. There are sources that have matches as early as April 18th, 1932 in the New Britain and Stanley, Connecticut area, such as Tony Ferrone defeating Fred Curry. And sources have the earliest version of Bull Curry, November 26, 1932, also in Connecticut when Bull Curry defeated Eddie Drew. As always, with anything this deep into pro wrestling, and we're kind of getting out of order here, but let me clear something up about the Bull Curry name. As Fred was working out the kinks in pro wrestling, he also worked in law enforcement. In a 1983 Hartford profile, Curry said himself that he joined the Hartford police force in 1939 while his wrestling career was still developing, and he stayed till roughly the mid-40s. I mean, someone that wanted to beat up people so bad they joined the circus probably doesn't make the best cop. And there is a rumored origin story of the Bull name that comes from his police days. As I mentioned, he was using the Bull name in the early 30s. He started working for the Fuzz in 39. Obviously, that doesn't make chronological sense. The legend goes that he responded to a call about some loose cows. A bull charged him, he grabbed it by the horns per the expression, and boom, they start calling this bovine throttling officer Bull. Even if the story is real, it's like at best reverse engineered to sort of fit the Bull Curry name, but you know, this is old kayfabe fibbing again. Unlike Hulk Hogan, who earned the Bull nickname by canoodling with Bubba the Love Sponge's wife. We'll be right back. Early records have Bull starting out in the Northeast and working his way to Ohio. And like just about every other wrestler, Bull spent those early years just kind of working it all out throughout the 30s. By 1940, he had built enough clout for himself to be part of a pretty cool boxing exhibition. Curry faced boxer Jack Dempsey in Detroit. Newspaper reprints have Curry getting KO'd by Dempsey in the second round, which, honest to God, is one of the most impressive things ever about a pro wrestler. Jack Dempsey was a dominant world heavyweight boxing champion in his prime. Now here, he's 45 years old, which scales it down a little bit, but there are levels between a dude that fights and a world boxing champion. The fact that Bull even lived to see the second round against Jack Dempsey is crazy, unless they were pulling the old school version of today's YouTuber versus old boxer scam. As we got a good way into the 40s, Bull had put the work in to form his character, to find his voice as an artist. And his art was absolutely fools the up. Bull Curry was not selling scientific wrestling. His style was creating the feeling that this dude in the ring with him might not make it. Curry was unpredictable violence. He had a crazed look, punctuated by his wild eyebrows, and he had that macho man-like intensity and commitment. He terrified kids, hell, he terrified adults. And alongside Curry throwing fists, Bull was also using weapons, with his favorite being brass knuckles. And using weapons wasn't something that was like super duper standard at the time. I mean, it happened. But basically, Bull was taking the violence of pro wrestling and magnifying it. As Curry's style, character, and presence developed, he started climbing the card and winning titles, working in New York and the Midwest through the 1950s. So to sum up these early years, you know, he's doing it. He's winning titles, he's traveling the country, he's doing weird celebrity boxing spots. You know, he's not small timing it here. By the 1950s, Bull Curry was down in Texas. And here is where his story goes from just another interesting old-timey wrestler to historically important. On March 6, 1953, Bull Curry won the inaugural Texas Brass Knuckles Championship, beating Danny McShane in the tournament finals. And McShane was one of Curry's defining opponents, helping Curry not just establish this title, but establish the division Curry would be synonymous with. Which is a point that needs to be made. Curry wasn't wrestling these matches by himself. Working the Invisible Man in the 50s would have got him shot, especially in Texas. If there's a major rival to the claim of original hardcore wrestler, it's Danny McShane, who debuted in 1930. Also Dick Raines, who's an old school pro wrestler, a heel that was disqualified apparently over 1,000 times, but I only bring him up so I can say, your mom loves when it Dick Raines, just outside with no umbrella. To boil it down, the Texas Brass Knuckles title is basically the first ever hardcore title. But this belt, this new sort of hardcore division, highlights everything Curry did well. Fist, foreign objects, no DQ chaos, brawling, and pushing the boundaries of what pro wrestling could be presented as. And all of this was more or less created to suit Bull. I mean, they even named it after his favorite foreign object. See, Bull was super over, but most promoters weren't about to put their money-drawing top guy in the ring to be absolutely mauled by Bull Curry. They needed their fancy man champion alive. Bull wasn't Lou Thesz. And sure, he could probably amateur wrestle well enough, but that's not what he was going for. Thesz wanted to beat you with technically masterful submission holds and AAU-style pins. Bull wanted to hit you in the face and watch you fold like IKEA furniture. So Bull was given the Brass Knuckles title to add another layer to his matches. There are disputes over the total reign count, but most sources give Bull 20 or more title reigns. And what all this did was introduce real, tangible danger to pro wrestling shows that had Bull Curry on it. If you saw him on the flyer, you knew you were about to see some shit. Curry was also the bad guy rolling in, not just cheating, but violently assaulting the promotion's favorite good guy, making crowds furious. Marks! But that's not to say that all of Bull Curry's success came in this vacuum of this era's version of hardcore wrestling. He absolutely did more. Back in May of 1954, Curry briefly held the Texas Heavyweight Championship, winning it May 7th, losing it May 21st. In 1956, he also held the Southern Heavyweight Championship in Georgia, winning it in Atlanta September 28th before losing it October 19th. Short reigns for sure, but what this does is prove that promoters didn't just see him as this novelty, blood and guts guy. So while Gorgeous George spent the 40s and 50s popularizing the better than you, arrogant, cheating heel, Curry absolute helped standardize a different heel formula. I'm going to hurt your favorite good guy, and if you got something to say, I'll hurt you too. For example, a famous piece of Bull Curry lore is the Galveston fan incident. A fan struck Curry with an iron pipe during his match with Pepper Gomez, so Bull chased the fan to the balcony and gave him a little bit of a receipt. As with most Curry stories or wrestling history from this era, the documentation isn't as clean as you'd want it to be, but all of this fits into this larger-than-life myth that Bull Curry carried around with him town to town. And a reputation like that attracts more myth-building craziness. While we're on the subject, let me knock out a special little fan fights and Riot section. That's right, the Bull Curry story has a Riot section. And if people aren't lighting cars on fire and looting TVs during your matches, do you even have heat? In New England, Curry had a feud with Frank Scarpa that reportedly led to multiple riots across Boston venues. Curry's 1955 match with Ray McIntyre in Houston sparked a riot that allegedly sent more than 140 fans to the hospital. Marks, one repeated Curry story, says that in 1956, after he brutalized George Becker, a fan rushed the ring to attack him and Bull Curry broke that man's jaw with a single punch. And another, during a match, Curry's facial expressions terrified a girl at ringside so badly she had to be carried out of the arena. Real or worked, what these stories do is help perfect the legend of Bull Curry. And that got Bull Curry over as a monster with crowds before he even drove to their town. And while it is a massive chunk of his legacy, he wasn't confined to just Texas. He was an absolute territory road dog. From 58 to 60, Curry worked a ton in the Northeast for Capital Wrestling. There, he'd work against a young, pre-title Bruno Sammartino, Antonino Rocca, who was absolutely on fire at the time, and even lost an NWA World title shot to Pat O'Connor, February 19th, 1960. During that, he'd also touched down back in Texas, doing a lot of Houston dates for Southwest Sports. In 62, Curry faced the recently covered Ivan the Terrible, aka Impero Firpo, in a match that could only have been an absolute train wreck. And in 63, he faced Lou Thez for the NWA title, which would be like peak Bret Hart facing peak New Jack. He also went global. Bull Curry toured Japan in 1964, primarily on JWA's 6 World League circuit. So all of this predates the big All Japan, New Japan split. And Curry was one of the early prototypes for that big, scary American heel in Japan. I mean, like, you had Freddie Blassie biting Ricky Dozen in the forehead and drawing blood, but, you know, Curry's one of the first people to be a monster heel over there. By 65, Bull Curry was spending some time up in big-time wrestling in the Michigan and Ohio region. There, he faced the great Bobo Brazil, the great Ernie Ladd, and even had matches against fellow hardcore pioneer, The Sheik. So Curry's historical significance isn't just local, isn't just Texas. He went town to town for decades, showing the world this new flavor of heel, taking on top guys, scaring fans, inspiring fellow wrestlers to continue the art form. By the mid-60s, Curry had brought in family, his son, Fred Curry, who just passed away in April of 2026. And this gets a little confusing because, you know, Bull was actually Fred Curry, but his son, who would have been Fred Curry Jr., wrestled as Fred Curry. And also, he had a son that wrestled as Fred Curry Jr., although he technically would be Fred Curry III. And the contrast between Curry and son was huge. Bull was terrifying, scary looking to put it politely, rough, hairy, violent, and rule-breaking. Fred was conventionally handsome, a squeaky clean babyface, who for the time was fairly exciting and high-flying. On July 20th, 1964, Bull and Flying Fred won the Texas International Tag Team Championship. Then, in December 67, the father-son team won the Ohio version of the World Tag Team Championship. And the Bull and Fred pairing let promoters do something pretty cool. You could sell legacy without turning Bull into a "I remember him" act, and also get Fred over it without him having to be a copy and paste of his dad. It wasn't one of those, "My dad was famous in the 80s, so you're legally obligated as a wrestling fan to like me." As Curry rolled into his mid-50s, he did something that's very hard and very rare to do in pro wrestling, and that's just be a wrestler. He never became a nostalgia act, which those are fine, those are fun, but he was something a little more like Terry Funk, where he always felt part of the show legitimately. Bull was never coming out to hit a finisher and wave to the crowd. Bull and Terry were always part of the actual show, always credible. And if you want a pretty cool example of Bull Curry, find this on YouTube. There's a Curry match June 20th, 1969, facing Johnny Valentine in Houston for the Gulf Athletic Club. It's Bull on his back nine, but still bringing it, and this match is an absolute masterclass in the working punch. Assuming these weren't real, a lot of them looked like they got in there. Mark. You also get a little glimpse of Bull as a good guy, which he could also do and was also good at. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Curry was deeply embedded in the Detroit and Ohio circuit, including Big Time Wrestling and National Wrestling Federation. From 1968 through 75, you could see him taking on The Sheik, Bobo Brazil, the Poffos, Thunderbolt Patterson, and Mark Lewin. Remember, he started in 1932. However, Curry's body eventually realized it had been pro wrestling for the last 40 years. In his own telling in that 1983 Hartford profile, he got jaundice in Tokyo in 1972, which led to a 7-hour surgery back home in Hartford. After that, he came back on a reduced schedule, wrestling a handful of times a month before finally retiring in 1979. After winding down in-ring work, he became a Hartford County Deputy Sheriff, working in courthouse lockup. Which had to have been weird if you were a criminal running from the police to be like, "Is that f***ing Bull Curry?" Following wrestling, he just kind of lived his life, making it 71 years until the great Bull Curry died on March 8th, 1985 in Columbus, Ohio, with the commonly reported cause of death being liver disease. And it's always tempting to call territory wrestlers regional stars due to the nature of the system at the time. Everything was so fragmented, but Curry was over in all the regions, so I believe that makes him a national star. If you need kayfabe accomplishments, this is someone who held titles across the land for decades. But Bull Curry is one of those wrestlers where belts only tell part of his story. His historical value comes from longevity, influence, and helping usher in a new violent wave of heel heat. Bull Curry's legacy has levels. First, style. He's one of the clearest frontrunners of hardcore wrestling. Obviously, other wrestlers are in there, and more extreme guys would ramp it up, but he's absolutely a pioneer. Second, performance. Curry proved that heels could draw more than boos. He could draw panic. He could draw untethered anger. He could draw a riot. Third level, creation. Look, Bull never wrestled in an explosive match. He never fell off a balcony or a Hell in a Cell. He never got Irish whipped into barbed wire. But Bull Curry and his peers were building the highway to it. One stiff punch, one pair of brass knuckles, one big bloody feud at a time. But it goes beyond hardcore. He was the archetype for the big monster heel, someone who made fans genuinely fear for his opponent. And finally, pro wrestling is a business. You gotta put butts in seats, brother. Bull printed money for any territory that booked him. He was a draw, a main eventer, and someone who was on TV for 30 years. Bull wasn't the prettiest wrestler. He was not the most technical, but he is truly one of pro wrestling's early greats. Even when you strip away the folklore, the runaway steer, the kayfabe fabrications, the crazy eyebrows, one fact remains. Bull Curry is a goddamn legend who deserves way more appreciation than he gets. Also, did I mention that I played AAU against Steph Curry?